The night was as quiet as death itself when Isabella Rossi found herself walking into the Valentino Club. The building loomed in the distance like a dark, ominous shadow against the Sicilian skyline, the low hum of the city muffled beneath the weight of her anxiety. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cigar smoke and expensive cologne. The voices were hushed, the music soft but steady like a heartbeat. Isabella had never belonged in places like this. She was a daughter of a once-proud family that had fallen into ruin, forced to face the consequences of a brother's reckless gambling addiction. Leo Rossi had promised he'd fix things, that he'd repay his debts, but now the family was staring down the barrel of its own destruction. And Leo was nowhere to be found. Her brother had made the mistake of borrowing money from Salvatore Mordi, the most powerful and feared mafia don in all of Sicily. Salvatore was a man whose name carried weight in more ways than one. To his enemies, he was a nightmare; to his allies, a godfather. To Isabella, he was a threat that could tear everything apart. She had no choice now. It was either face him or watch her family crumble under the weight of debts that could not be paid. Leo had no intention of ever fulfilling his end of the bargain. He had already sold his soul to the devil, and Isabella had to pick up the pieces. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble floors as she approached the bar, her pulse quickening with every step. The bartender gave her a cursory glance before looking away, as though the tension in the room had already made her presence unimportant. She scanned the room for him, Salvatore Mordi. And there he was, sitting at the back of the room, cloaked in shadows. His presence was undeniable even from a distance. He was a man made of stone, his features chiseled, his eyes dark pools of power and secrets. His suit was immaculate, tailored to perfection, and his hands, resting calmly on the table, looked like they could snap a man in half without a second thought. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine as she approached him. She was no stranger to fear, but this was different. Salvatore's eyes flicked to her as she drew closer, a small, unreadable smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Miss Rossi," he said in a low voice, his tone calm, almost amused. "I didn't expect to see you here." Isabella stood before him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not here for pleasantries," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "I'm here for Leo." Salvatore leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "I take it he's not here himself." "No, he's gone," Isabella lied, though she knew Salvatore could likely see through it. Leo was hiding, running from the mess he had created. But Isabella wasn't about to let her brother's failure destroy everything, not if she could stop it. "Gone," Salvatore repeated, his voice smooth and dangerous. "I doubt that's the full story, Miss Rossi. I would say you're here to beg for his life." Isabella lifted her chin, meeting his gaze head-on. "I'm here to offer something better than my brother's worthless promises," she said, her voice more confident now. "I'm here to settle his debt." Salvatore raised an eyebrow, a slight smirk playing at his lips. "Oh, and what makes you think I'd be interested in such a deal?" She hesitated for a moment, considering her words. This was the moment, the one where she either succeeded or lost everything. "Because I'm not like my brother," she said. "I don't make empty promises. I don't break my word." Salvatore studied her intently, his gaze piercing as if trying to unravel every thought she was hiding. His eyes were cold, calculating, but there was something else behind them, something almost curious. "You think I should trust you?" "I think I'm your only option," Isabella replied without flinching. For a long moment Salvatore remained silent, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. His fingers drummed lightly against the surface of the table, a quiet sound that echoed in the heavy air. Finally, he stood. The shift in the room was immediate, the power dynamic changing as he towered over her, his presence overwhelming. "Tell me, Miss Rossi," he said, his voice low and filled with promise, "what exactly are you offering me? Your life, your loyalty, or something else?" Isabella's breath caught in her throat, her pulse racing. She had no idea what he was truly asking, but in that moment, she knew that saying yes to him meant crossing a line she could never uncross. But for the sake of her family, she had no choice. "I'm offering you me," she said quietly, her words heavy with the weight of what they meant. "For as long as you need me, for as long as it takes to clear my brother's debt." Salvatore's eyes darkened, his smile widening into something more dangerous. "You're an interesting woman, Isabella Rossi," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "You've just made a deal with the devil, and now you're mine." Isabella's heart sank, but there was no turning back now. She was already in too deep. The Rossi name once meant something in Palermo, but now it was little more than a whisper attached to debts and disgrace. Isabella had grown up believing in justice, in fairness, but here she was, walking side by side with a man who didn't believe in anything but power, and she had just promised herself to him. The black SUV that whisked her away from the Valentino Club moved through the narrow Sicilian streets like a ghost. Salvatore sat beside her, silent, commanding. Even without speaking, he filled the space. The tension between them was electric, coiled, volatile, inevitable. She stared out the window, trying to calm her racing thoughts. What had she done? "You're awfully quiet," Salvatore said finally, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Isabella turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. "I'm thinking about the mess my brother left behind, and how I've ended up cleaning it with my life." Salvatore's mouth curved into a faint smile. "Life is just a word, Isabella. What you've offered me is far more valuable." She bristled. "And what exactly do you want from me? Do I sit pretty on your arm to make you look respectable, or am I some pawn you can use in your business?" He chuckled softly, amused by her defiance. "You're not a pawn, but don't flatter yourself, you're not a queen yet either." She didn't know whether to be insulted or afraid, maybe both. They arrived at a grand villa tucked into the hillside, surrounded by high stone walls and iron gates. The estate exuded wealth and security. It wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Armed men flanked the gate and the entrance, all nodding in respect as Salvatore stepped out and offered Isabella his hand. She hesitated for a breath, then took it. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of cedarwood and old leather. Everything was polished to perfection, dark wood floors, oil paintings, thick velvet drapes, but it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a prison with gold bars. "This will be your room," Salvatore said as they entered a spacious suite. The bed was massive, the windows overlooked the olive groves below, and the silence was absolute. "I expected a dungeon," Isabella said dryly. Salvatore smirked. "A beautiful woman doesn't belong in chains unless she asks for them." Her eyes narrowed, but he was already walking toward the door. "I'll expect you downstairs tomorrow morning. We'll have breakfast and discuss your future." He paused at the threshold. "Rest, Isabella, you'll need your strength." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in a stranger's mansion, bound by a deal she barely understood. The next morning, Isabella awoke to soft light spilling through the windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was, but the sharp knock on the door brought reality crashing back. A young maid entered, quiet and efficient. She laid out clothes, a silk blouse, black slacks, subtle gold jewelry, and helped Isabella get ready without saying much. It was surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. When she descended to the dining room, Salvatore was already there, sipping coffee and reading the morning paper like a man who controlled the world and had time to spare. "Good morning," he said without looking up. Isabella sat across from him. "Do you always drink your coffee like a king while other people clean up your messes?" That made him smile. He folded the paper and set it aside. "No one cleans up my messes. I don't make any. Your brother, however." "I'm not my brother's." "I know, that's why you're here." His gaze lingered on her, thoughtful. "You said you were offering yourself to settle the debt. That's a vague promise. I need specifics." "What do you want?" she asked. "Loyalty, intelligence, obedience when necessary, and honesty even when it's uncomfortable." "You want me to be your what, advisor, assistant?" He leaned in, his voice lower. "Partner." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Salvatore continued, "You have a mind. I read your file, top of your class, business degree, internship at one of the largest firms in Milan. That's not nothing. I don't need a pet. I need someone I can trust at my side, someone who won't betray me." Isabella stared at him. "And you think that person is me?" "I think it could be." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "But it depends on how far you're willing to go." There was a pause. Then she asked, "Will you let my brother go if I do this?" Salvatore's smile vanished. "Leo's fate is his own, but I won't punish your family further. That's my word." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only one she'd get. Over the following days, Isabella found herself pulled deeper into Salvatore's world. He took her to meetings, subtle affairs in cafes, back rooms, and vineyards. She watched, listened, learned. Salvatore didn't hide the darker side of his operations from her, but he didn't revel in it either. He handled his business with brutal efficiency and quiet dominance. And he never once forced her into anything. But the more time she spent with him, the more she began to see past the cold mask. Beneath the dawn was a man shaped by loyalty, loss, and shadows. He protected his people. He never raised his voice, but when he spoke, the room fell silent. And he was watching her too, testing her. One night he summoned her to the study. "I need you to help me make a decision," he said, motioning her toward the desk. "What kind of decision?" "A man in my crew, Nicola Venti. He's been skimming money. I have proof." "And you want me to decide what happens to him?" "I want to know what you think, your mind, your judgment, not what you think I want to hear." Isabella hesitated, then spoke. "If you let him go, you look weak. If you kill him, you set an example, but you lose a man who might have been scared, not disloyal. What if you confront him, show him the evidence, and give him one chance to redeem himself under your direct watch?" Salvatore studied her, then gave a slow, approving nod. "You surprise me, Isabella." She met his gaze. "And you terrify me." They both smiled faintly, honestly. The air in the villa had changed. It wasn't just the silence or the way the staff stole glances when Isabella passed. It was the subtle shift between her and Salvatore. He no longer looked at her as an outsider. He had begun to see her as part of his world, and somehow that frightened her more than the guns, the guards, or the whispered threats. That evening, as dusk painted the Sicilian sky in deep, bruised shades of purple, Isabella stood on the balcony of her room, staring at the olive groves. She couldn't sleep, not after what she'd done. Nicola Venti had been given a second chance because of her, but it wasn't mercy Salvatore admired in her, it was control, calculated decision-making. She was starting to understand that this wasn't just about debts anymore. It was about power. And she was beginning to taste it. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. "You're not dressed for dinner," Salvatore said, leaning against the doorway. He wore a crisp dark shirt, sleeves rolled, his usual tie abandoned for something more casual. He looked human. "I wasn't hungry," she replied. "You will be." He stepped forward, his presence enveloping her. "Come walk with me." She followed him through the villa, down a quiet corridor that led to a private wine cellar. It was vast, beautifully lit, filled with the rich scent of oak and aged bottles. In the center stood a small table, already set for two. He pulled her chair out. She sat without protest. "I remember the first time I saw you," he said as he poured the wine. "You walked into the Valentino Club like a storm. Everyone noticed, but you only saw me." Isabella looked down at her glass. "I didn't have a choice." "We all have choices," he said, echoing his own words from that night. "But you made one most wouldn't." She met his gaze. "I don't regret it." His eyes searched hers like he was trying to decide how much of her was still her own. "Good, because once you're in, there's no going back." They ate in silence for a while, simple dishes, fresh pasta, grilled fish. It was strangely intimate, even domestic. She had never imagined sharing quiet meals with a man like him. Halfway through, he leaned back, his tone shifting. "You've been here 2 weeks. You've seen enough to understand how things work. But I need to know, are you ready to stand beside me, not just in luxury, but in blood?" The question hung heavy in the air. "I don't know if I'm built for this life," she admitted, "but I know I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to control my fate, and maybe yours too." Salvatore smiled, a rare, dangerous smile. "That's the right answer." The next day, the first real test came. A black car arrived outside the villa just after dawn. Salvatore's consigliere, Matteo, approached Isabella while she was reading in the garden. "He wants you with him today. Business in Catania," he said. She nodded and rose, no questions. The drive was long, the coastline unfolding in golden curves, but the mood inside the car was tense. Salvatore rarely spoke. Matteo filled her in. A rival family had been encroaching on Morty territory. An arms deal gone wrong. A warning had to be delivered. When they arrived at the port warehouse, Salvatore didn't let her stay behind. He brought her inside. 4 men were kneeling on the cold concrete, bloodied and bound. They weren't kids. They were hardened soldiers from the Romano family, men who knew the cost of betrayal. Salvatore walked past them slowly, like a predator. He didn't shout, he didn't posture, he simply spoke. "You were warned. My territory ends at the river. You crossed it. You moved weapons through my docks, and now you expect forgiveness." One of the men spat blood. "You're losing grip, Morty. Everyone sees it." Salvatore didn't blink. He pulled his gun, silencer already fixed, and shot the man through the head. The other 3 froze. Isabella flinched, but didn't look away. He turned to her then, as calm as if he'd been discussing the weather. "What should we do with the others?" It was a test, another one. She looked at the remaining men, afraid but not broken. "They're not leaders. They followed orders. Make an example of one more. Let the others go back with a message. Show you're merciful, but not weak." Salvatore considered her words. Then he pointed to another man and ended him with a clean shot. The other 2 were dragged away, trembling, changed. When they got back into the car, Isabella didn't speak. Her heart was pounding, her mind racing. She just watched 2 men die, and she'd helped decide it. Salvatore reached for her hand, strong, warm. You're not just surviving, Isabella, you're becoming. That night she couldn't sleep. She wandered the halls of the villa until she ended up in his study. It smelled of tobacco and old wood. His jacket was draped over the chair. A family photo, old, black and white, sat on the shelf. A young boy, a woman with fierce eyes. She picked it up just as Salvatore entered. That's my mother, he said quietly. Isabella turned. She looks like she didn't take shit from anyone. She didn't. He walked toward her. She taught me everything, and then she died because someone thought they could scare me by killing her. There was pain in his voice, still fresh, still raw, even after years. I'm sorry, she said softly. He shook his head. Don't be. That was the day I stopped believing in rules, and the day I started writing my own. She put the photo down. You've changed me, Isabella, he said, and that scares me more than bullets. He took her face in his hands, slow, reverent. But I think I'd rather die with you than live without ever having touched you. And then he kissed her. Not like the cold, dangerous man the world feared, but like someone starved for something real, something that didn't come with blood or power. She melted into him, and for the first time she didn't feel like a pawn. She felt like his equal. Morning light filtered through the gauzy curtains of Salvatore's room, softening the brutal edges of the world outside. Isabella lay beside him, her back against the silk sheets, her mind spinning faster than her heart would allow. What had started as an obligation had turned into something far more complicated. She was no longer just repaying a debt. She was involved in his world, in his war, and now in his bed. Salvatore stirred beside her. For a moment she just watched him. Without the hard mask he wore during the day, he looked younger, human, vulnerable even, but she knew better than to believe softness meant weakness. His eyes opened slowly, immediately locking on her. You're still here, he said, his voice rough from sleep. I wasn't sure if I should be, she admitted. Salvatore sat up and brushed her hair from her face. There's a way out if that's what you're looking for. I can make it happen. No one would dare touch you. And if I'm not looking for a way out, she asked softly. He didn't smile. Instead, he leaned in and kissed her forehead. Then you need to know what's coming next. Later that day, Salvatore gathered his inner circle in the war room, a high-ceilinged chamber lined with maps, blueprints, and surveillance images. Isabella stood off to the side, half forgotten, half observed. Some of the men didn't like that she was there, but none dared question her presence. Matteo laid out the news. The Romano family isn't backing off. They've aligned with the Vital clan. Together they control nearly half of the eastern ports. And they want the rest, Salvatore said, packing slowly. They think we're vulnerable, that we're distracted. His eyes flicked to Isabella, but she didn't flinch. We move first, he continued. Cut their supply lines, hit their warehouse in Syracuse. Matteo, get me the inside man. There's a problem, Matteo replied. Our contact, Carlo, he's gone dark. Salvatore's jaw clenched. Find him, or find someone else to take his place. That evening, Salvatore and Isabella retreated to the rooftop garden, a place scented with blooming orange trees and the salty wind off the sea. The quiet between them wasn't strained, it was thoughtful. You shouldn't be here for this, he said. A war is coming. I know, she said simply, but I'm not running. He looked at her then, a long, unreadable stare. Do you know how many people I've lost, Isabella? Friends, blood, even love. This life takes more than it gives. I'm not asking it to give me anything, she replied. Only you. His hand reached for hers, then stay close and trust no one. 2 nights later, the plan went into motion. Salvatore's crew, men dressed in black, silent and precise, slipped into Syracuse under the cover of darkness. Isabella wasn't supposed to be there, but she insisted. "Let me be your eyes on the inside," she'd said. "No one suspects me. I can go where your men can't." It was risky, but it worked. Disguised as a logistics inspector, Isabella infiltrated the outer layer of the warehouse. From there, she sent updates to Salvatore in real time where the guards rotated, where the surveillance blind spots were. Everything was going perfectly until it was. A scream cut through the night. One of Salvatore's men had been discovered too early. The Romano guards opened fire. Chaos erupted. From her hiding place, Isabella watched as the plan began to unravel. Her heart pounded. She could hear Salvatore's voice through her earpiece, ordering the extraction. "Get her out now." She moved fast, but so did the enemy. 2 Romano men cornered her near the stairwell. One reached for her arm, sneering. "Morty's little whore, didn't expect you to bleed tonight, did you?" Before he could strike, a gunshot echoed. The man dropped, the other spun, but Salvatore was already there, silent, deadly precise. His hand shook as he grabbed Isabella. "Are you hit?" he demanded. She shook her head, breathless. "No." His expression was pure fury, not at her, but at the danger she'd been in. At the fear that he might have lost her. "You don't get to die on me," he growled. "Not now, not ever." Back at the villa, after the dust had settled, Isabella sat by the fireplace wrapped in a blanket. Salvatore stood across the room, watching the flames. The silence was heavy with unspoken things. "You were right," she said finally. "I'm not built for this." He turned to her slowly, "Then walk away." "I can't." "Why not?" She stood, walked to him, and placed a hand over his chest. "Because every time I see you ready to give everything to protect what's yours, I see the man behind the dawn, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed." His eyes softened, his defenses crumbling. "I told myself I'd never love again," he whispered, "but I think I was just waiting for someone strong enough to handle the truth." She leaned in, resting her forehead against his, then stopped fighting it. Their lips met again, this time slower, deeper, not lust, not adrenaline, something real, something they both feared and yet needed. Later that night, Salvatore sat alone in his study, a file open before him. Inside were photos, surveillance images, documents, all pointing to the same conclusion. There was a mole. Someone inside his organization was leaking information to the Romano family, and the last page of the file contained something he didn't expect. A photo of Isabella, taken weeks before she'd ever come to him. A rage unlike any he'd known boiled in his chest. He didn't want to believe it. But he knew betrayal. He'd lived with it all his life. Could he trust her? Or had he fallen for the perfect weapon? Salvatore didn't sleep that night. The photo stared back at him from the file. Isabella, dressed casually, walking through a market in Palermo long before she had ever set foot in the Valentino Club, long before she claimed to be repaying a debt for her brother. The timestamp didn't lie. The surveillance source was clear, one of his own safe house cameras. He had to know the truth. By morning, he was colder than she had ever seen him. When Isabella entered the dining room, smiling softly and brushing a loose curl behind her ear, Salvatore's mask was already in place. "Sit," he said, his tone unreadable. She paused, confused. Is something wrong? He didn't answer, just pushed the file across the table. Her hands trembled as she opened it, then stilled. The color drained from her face. I can explain. Salvatore's eyes burned into her. I'm listening. She looked up at him, hurt, fear, and defiance swirling behind her gaze. It wasn't what you think. I didn't even know what I was being photographed for. Then explain why you're in a secure location days before you came to negotiate your brother's debt. Isabella took a deep breath, her voice low. Because I was followed weeks ago, I didn't realize it until later, but someone was watching me, threatening me. I went to a friend for help, someone who owed my family a favor. He told me to lay low, that he knew a place. I stayed one night. I never knew it was yours. Who was this friend? He asked tightly. Marco Fabbri, she whispered. Salvatore's jaw tensed. Marco Fabbri had once been loyal until he vanished. He'd assumed the man was dead. Apparently not. That son of a Salvatore stood up sharply, packing the room. He set you up, he muttered, put you in front of my cameras, let me find you, all to make me believe you were part of a ploy. But I wasn't, Isabella said firmly, stepping toward him. Salvatore, I didn't even know who you were back then. He stopped, turning to face her. I want to believe you, he admitted, voice low and raw, but in my world, lies get people killed. I don't survive by trusting the wrong person. She met his gaze without flinching. Then test me, I'm still here. I've risked my life for you, bled for your cause. What more do you want? His eyes searched hers. Everything, he said quietly. I want everything, but if you ever lie to me again, I won't just walk away, I'll destroy you. I understand, she said, but I'm not lying now. He believed her. He had to believe her. 2 days later, Salvatore received word. Marco Fabbri had resurfaced in Naples, and he was working with the Romano family. I want him alive, Salvatore ordered Matteo. I need answers. The hunt was on. In the meantime, Isabella stayed close, but tension lingered between them like smoke. They touched, kissed, even slept beside each other, but the shadow of mistrust hovered. One night, as the rain battered the windows, she sat on the edge of the bed, watching him pour a glass of scotch. Do you regret letting me stay? She asked quietly. Salvatore turned to her. I regret letting my guard down. A long silence passed. But I don't regret you, he added. That night they made love not with heat, but with desperation. Two people clinging to something fragile and precious in a world built to destroy it. In Naples, Salvatore's men found Marco. He was hiding in a brothel under an assumed name, guarded by Romano thugs. It took a bloody ambush and 3 casualties, but they dragged him back to Sicily, bound and gagged. Salvatore faced him in the basement of his estate, where no screams ever left the stone walls. You used her, he said coldly, staring Marco down. Why? Marco, beaten and bloodied, spat blood at the floor. Because I knew you'd fall for her. You're not as invincible as you think, Morty. Who are you working for, Romano, Vitale? Marco gave a weak smile. Both doesn't matter now, the clock's ticking on your empire. Salvatore's jaw flexed. I should kill you slowly. But you won't, Marco wheezed. Because deep down, you know I didn't betray you. She did. Salvatore's knuckles tightened. Marco's final words before he lost consciousness echoed in Salvatore's mind. That night, he confronted Isabella again. I want to believe you, he said, but Marco, he made it sound like you were always part of this. She stood still, eyes burning. And you believe him over me. I don't know who to believe anymore. I've stood by you, Salvatore, risked everything. Don't let your fear destroy what we've built. He closed the distance between them, his voice low. Then prove it, help me finish this. How? Marco says Romano is planning a hit, something big. I want you to go back to your brother. Pretend you're pulling away from me. Get inside, find out what they're planning. Isabella hesitated. You're asking me to betray my family. I'm asking you to save us both, he said. You said you'd do anything, this is it. She nodded, jaw set, then I'll do it. The train to Palermo was nearly empty. Isabella sat alone in the corner of the first-class carriage, her heart pounding beneath her coat. Outside, the Sicilian countryside blurred by in streaks of gold and green. Inside, she rehearsed her lines. She had left Salvatore's estate before dawn, a whisper in the night, no guards, only a mission. To lie. To betray her brother, her blood, for the man she was beginning to love. At the Palermo station, a black car waited. The driver barely looked at her before opening the door. You're late, her brother Angelo muttered from the back seat. He looked thinner than she remembered, worn by whatever schemes he'd wrapped himself in. I came as soon as I could, Isabella replied, her voice tight. You said it was urgent. Angelo studied her closely, as if trying to read the truth beneath her words. You've been with Morty. She didn't deny it. Yes, I thought you were dead, Angelo, and then I found out you owed a debt to the most dangerous man in Sicily. What was I supposed to do? You weren't supposed to sleep with him, he snapped. She flinched, then hardened. You brought me into this, don't lecture me now. They rode in silence after that, the tension coiling like a fuse between them. Back at his apartment, a penthouse once belonging to a politician who'd mysteriously vanished, Isabella walked into a room filled with men she didn't recognize. Cold eyes, armed hands. She was in enemy territory now. That night, Angelo pulled her into his office. I know what you're doing, he said quietly. Isabella kept her face blank. What do you mean? You think you're here to spy on me, to feed Salvatore information. You're not as subtle as you think, Sorella. She said nothing. He leaned in. I'm not angry. In fact, I'm relieved, because now we can use you to feed him what we want him to know. Isabella's blood turned cold. He's planning something, Angelo continued. Something big. We're going to hit his main port operation, cut the head off the snake, but we'll let him think we're after something else. You'll give him the wrong target. I won't lie for you, she whispered. Angelo smiled darkly. You already are just by being here. She left the room shaken. This was more dangerous than she'd realized. Salvatore hadn't sent her into a game, he'd sent her into a war. Back at the estate, Salvatore stood at the large window of his office, waiting. It had been 2 days since Isabella left, no word, no contact. Matteo entered quietly. The Romano shipments have been rerouted. We think they're preparing for something, could be a diversion. Or a trap, Salvatore muttered. He turned to face Matteo. If they touch her, I burn Palermo. Isabella played both sides like a woman on the edge of a knife. Every word she spoke to her brother was weighed, every glance calculated. But one slip, one wrong move, and she wouldn't leave that apartment alive. On the 3rd day, she managed to get a message out through a coded voicemail. The storm is hitting the wrong shore. Salvatore deciphered it instantly. They were going after his warehouse on the western coast, not the front-facing port. Move all the arms, he ordered. Set the trap, I want to end this. That night it began. Romano soldiers and rogue elements of Angelo's crew struck hard, but Salvatore's men were waiting. Gunfire echoed across the docks, smoke lit up the sky. By the time dawn broke, 20 bodies lined the warehouse floor. But it wasn't over. Because Salvatore had made another move, one no one expected. He took Angelo. As the smoke cleared, Salvatore's men raided the Palermo apartment and dragged Isabella's brother back to the estate in chains. When Isabella returned, exhausted, shaking, she walked into the main hall and froze. Angelo was kneeling on the marble floor, bloodied, cuffed. Salvatore stood over him like a god passing judgment. "You lied to me," Salvatore said to Isabella, eyes cold. "What?" she breathed. "I told you to find out what they were planning. You didn't tell me he was working with Romano's heir himself, or that they planned to frame one of my own lieutenants." "I didn't know," she said, horrified. "I swear I didn't." "But he did," Salvatore growled, "and now I have to decide if your blood is worth sparing." Isabella stepped between them. "You want to kill him? Fine, but you do it knowing it will break me." Salvatore's eyes narrowed. "Don't test me, Isabella." "I'm not," she said. "I'm asking you to choose who you are, the man who punishes betrayal or the man who says he wants everything. You can't have both." A long, tense silence filled the hall. Finally, Salvatore looked away. "Get him out of here, lock him up, no more blood yet." His men dragged Angelo away. Isabella collapsed into a chair, trembling. Salvatore sat beside her, watching her in silence. "You saved him," she said finally. "No," he replied, "you did. I don't care about him, I care about you." She turned to him, eyes glassy. "Then stop treating me like the enemy." His voice dropped. "Then stop making me doubt you." Their lips met in a slow, desperate kiss, one that tasted of blood, ash, and forgiveness. But peace wouldn't last. Not with Romano still breathing. Not with Angelo's secret still buried. Not with the weight of their choices pressing down. But for now, in the quiet after the storm, they held each other. Still standing. Still fighting. And maybe, just maybe, still falling in love. The skies over Sicily burned red with sunset as Salvatore stood on the balcony of his estate, the sea breeze carrying the scent of salt and smoke. The war was not over. It had simply paused. Inside, Isabella sat in silence, nursing a glass of wine, her fingers trembling slightly. She hadn't spoken to her brother since his imprisonment in the underground cell. Every day she walked past the locked door. Every day she heard nothing. And still, Salvatore hadn't made a final decision. That morning, Matteo had brought news. Romano had gone underground. The planned strike had failed, but that made him more dangerous, not less. Salvatore joined Isabella in the sitting room. "He's planning something," he said. "Romano." Salvatore gave a slight nod. "He wants blood, mine, yours, your brother. He has nothing left to lose." Isabella met his gaze. "Then let's end it. No more hiding, no more planning, finish it." Salvatore looked at her, really looked. "You mean that?" She nodded. "Whatever happens next, I'm with you, even if it kills us." A muscle in his jaw tensed. "I don't want you near this. I'm already in it." He stepped closer, brushing his fingers through her hair, resting his forehead against hers. "Then we do it together." The final strike. Romano's last stronghold was in Messina, in an abandoned villa near the cliffs. Salvatore assembled his men with surgical precision, no grand show of force, just death wrapped in silence. Isabella insisted on coming. She wore black, no makeup, hair tied back. When they arrived, the air was heavy with dread. Romano's men were waiting, but not for long. It was brutal. Vast. Final. Salvatore moved through the chaos like a storm, cold, efficient, killing only when necessary, sparing no traitors. Isabella stayed behind a wall, gun in hand, heart in her throat. When it was over, Romano lay dying at the top of the stairs, a bullet through his chest. Salvatore approached slowly, gun still in hand. Romano spat blood and laughed. "You think this ends with me," he rasped. "There's always another snake." Salvatore crouched beside him. "No," he said quietly, "there's not." One final shot ended it. And with it, the last open threat to his empire. 2 weeks later, peace settled like a ghost across the estate. Salvatore's enemies had fallen silent. The police, bought or blackmailed, kept their distance. Isabella's brother remained locked away, but alive. And Isabella herself. She stayed. By choice. Each morning she walked the grounds. Each night she returned to Salvatore's bed, tangled in sheets and shadows, and whispered truths. She didn't ask for promises. She didn't need declarations. But one evening he gave her both. He took her hand as they stood in the rose garden, half wild and overgrown from neglect. "I built this world from ash and bone," he said, "and for years I thought I'd die alone in it." She didn't speak, just squeezed his hand. "I don't want that anymore," he said. "I want something more." "What?" she whispered. "You." He reached into his jacket. A ring, simple, elegant, a single sapphire. Not flashy, not gaudy. Just hers. She stared at it, then at him. "You're serious?" "I want you to marry me, Isabella Rossi," he said. "Not because I own you, but because you survived this world with me, because you make me believe there's something worth saving." Tears slipped down her cheeks. And she nodded. Yes. 1 year later. The Valentino Club had changed. Cleaner, sharper, still full of power and whispers, but now it had a queen. Mrs. Morty. Isabella stood beside Salvatore as they hosted their first charity gala, elegant, confident, untouchable. Rumors swirled about how she tamed the dawn, about the blood spilled for their love, but no one dared say a word to her face. And Salvatore. He stood beside her, a hand always on her lower back, his gaze never far. She was his weakness. She was his strength. Their world was still dangerous, still dark. But together they had carved out something real. Something permanent. Something like forever.